words like marriage, and what I just gave the example of marriage, can also affect our job situations, our relationships. All those things that we're building up begin to crumble and and to get torn away. They have a destructive impact in them by nature. Jesus was approached in Mark 7 by some people that were confronting him about the behaviors of the disciples and stuff. And Jesus, went to these Pharisees, he called them, but he said, look, you're so concerned on the stuff on the outside and how it causes you to be unclean and sinful and all that stuff. He says, that's not it at all. He says, brother, it's what's on the inside that comes out that makes you unclean and makes you filthy. He's describing this very thing, that the very words we say when they're given for the wrong motives begin to destroy us and to be able to tear away at relationships. If you want to look at relationships and the struggles you had, we have a person there. Look back at just the words that have been shared and how they can destroy. Third thing in here he says, though, is words display who we really are. In this particular passage, he goes on to talk about how he gives the example of a spring and salt water and clean water, and how he says the two can't come from the same. He talks about a vine can't bear figs and stuff. He says it's the very words that are being said are a part of who we are. Much like he was using in that Mark 7 example, where he's going to him, look at these words you say that are destructive and sin. It goes back to where you really are in your heart and what's going on. Jesus said this in Matthew 12:34. He says, for out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. You go back and you think of the words that you say. The words you use with your spouse or with your children or your parents. The words you use with your classmates or your coworkers. And understand that the power of those words really display who you are as a person. You might not like it to think it that way, but people look at you as we look at other people, and we kind of draw a conclusion of what that person's like based on the words that they say that come out of their mouth. It defines us. And so since those words are so powerful, goes back to the idea why motives matter so much. We have to be honest about our motives. We have to look at our own motives. Going back to verse 2 in this particular passage, when he guards us, it says, be cautious about being a teacher. He says in here, we all stumble in many ways. If anyone is never at fault in what he says, he is a perfect man, able to keep his whole body in check. He's not going around saying, come on, there's got to be some perfect people in this room. James is saying, look, none of us are perfect. We all know that. So therefore, we have to be honest with ourselves and recognize that the very words that we say have to always be put into question, always be put into check, and say, what was my motive for wanting to say this? Because in all honesty, we are drawn to it's easier to say the negative stuff than the positive. It takes more effort to think of the positive thing. Maybe I'm just speaking about myself. But those things seem to come quicker in us, and it's just much more of a challenge to try to look at those things that are positive, that when you look into the whole positive, it tends to be that kind of focus away on what I want and focus in another area. So what is our motive? I just want to stop a moment when we talk about motives in here. What is the motive that causes us to hate evil and delight in good and to rejoice in the good? Well, the motive is Jesus Christ. If you go through the scriptures and all the motives that are in there, the motives, as an example in Romans 12, says, in view of God's mercy, knowing that God's motive, for God so loved the world that He gave His only Son, in view of God's love into my own life that He has shown to me, that's my motive. In view of the forgiveness God has shown to me, I forgive someone else. That's my motive. Paul, in describing, if you're looking back in 1 Corinthians 13 and talking about love, he's going through and talking about God's love for us and His discipline and His working in His life. And look what God has done in your life. And in view of that, he says, let's talk about love. That's our motive. Our motive is to look in our own life and be able to say, this love that God has for me, that is in me, that's my motive to show love. Not about you or how you guys are acting to me. Not about it. It's totally the opportunity to be able to to respond out of gratitude for God's love. And when we respond that way and we let God be the motive, Christ be the motive in our life, that gives us the power to choose the right words. That gives us the power to be able to approach any situation in a loving way and respond in a loving way. And so we need to check those motives. But the other thing here is to look then, given that, then how do we love people with our words? It's about loving people with our words. How can our words delight in a situation, in the truth? Let me give you a few ways that kind of can touch out of this. We love people with honest words. We're speaking the truth. We know that we have to be honest in any situation. And so we love people with honest words. And the example, of course, we have is Jesus Christ. I mean, here's a guy, if you go through the stories of Jesus, who could call it the way it is. You know, when Peter was starting to question Jesus' plan and what was going on, he turns to Peter and says, "Get behind me, Satan." I mean, I don't know how many of you, when you want to give me a suggestion, and I said, "Hey, get behind me, Satan," would take that into constructive criticism. But that's what Jesus would say. When they questioned some of the actions, he would call him a Pharisee, a hypocrite. "You hypocrite." When the disciples are all upset in the boat, you know, and wanting him to calm a storm, he says, "God, where's your faith, you people?" He called it the way it is. And most of us, if you're being honest like me, know that, boy, that's hard, because I don't know how a person's going to take it. But the reason people could take it with Jesus is because they understood the love that he had for them. He earned that right to talk that way because they knew that it was all based on love. That what I'm saying to you, when he called Peter Satan, Peter knows that his total interest is to be able to bring out the truth and understand, because he cared so much about Peter. Ephesians 4:15 says in that passage, if you read through it, we're speaking the truth in love. That's how you speak the truth. It has to be bathed in love. The motivation has to be love. And it has to be a love that other person understands that it's love. And that goes back to the idea that sometimes we have to earn it. You know, the right person to speak the truth has to be a person who says, "I've earned that right." You can't just go up to anybody in the street and say, "Hey, let me tell you this, I'm going to give you some truth here. You need to hear it, blah, blah, blah." That's why it's so important as a church and as a people that we serve people first. That's why we go out into schools or the community and we serve, because it earns us the right to be able to say, "Hear me when I say you need to do this." Because they know first, they are people who care about us. So I want to listen to what they have to say. Proverbs 27:5 says, "An open rebuke is better than hidden love." Passage is talking about the fact that, you know, and this, a lot of times you'll hear this in parenting. Parenting, loving a child is not to let them do what they want. So, you know what, I don't want to confront them. Or a friend, to, you know, say, I got a friend, he's doing this, I disagree with it. Or a neighbor, I disagree with it. But you know what, who am I to say? Everybody's do their own thing. That's not love. Love is to have such a desire to see them to go the right way that you feel compelled to go into their life and say, "Look it, I so care about you that I got to be honest." The church is moved to be able to go to the people who believe strongly that to have a life with Christ and to allow Him to be in control of our life and choosing to live a life that honors Him and is a witness to Him is so great, so full of joy as the Bible describes it, that I go to a neighbor in the street or someone that I know that doesn't know Christ and say, "I got to be honest with them." And what you do is you pray for God to give you that, earn that right to do that. But when they know you care, they listen. That's how the gospel gets shared. That's how the gospel moves in the lives of people. Sometimes acting in love is speaking the truth. A truth that needs to be said. If it's done with the right motives. And that's the key.